Once, in the misty dawn of human memory, a word was not merely a sign or a sound. It was a force. It was a way of touching reality, soft, almost imperceptible, yet capable of bending minds and directing actions. Long before borders, flags, or written laws appeared, it was the word that became the first instrument of submission. And among all the words that passed through the darkness of time, there was one in particular, a word that never disappeared, a word that survived the flames of fallen temples and shattered dynasties. It changed its clothing, but not its nature. It crossed deserts, oceans, epochs. It was passed in silence, in the middle of the night, from one ruler to another. It was preserved not as a tool, but as a vessel of dominance. That word is power. When it was first spoken, the world did not yet know writing. People gathered around fires, listening closely to the voice of the one who claimed to know the way. He spoke in the name of spirits, of ancestors, of the sky. He said, "It must be so." He said, "Obey," but he did not use the whip. He used the word. And from that moment, it began. Power, not as a function, not as a duty, but as a status, as a mystical height one cannot climb, only bow before. Soon, this word became an invisible ring placed upon the mind without causing pain. It did not maim, it guided. And for that reason, it was more dangerous than any weapon. Centuries passed. Clans and tribes rose and fell. Lands consumed other lands. And with every new turn of history, whoever gained control first gained access to the word. He did not simply speak, he spoke on behalf of power. It was not speech. It was an incantation. The rulers of the past understood the force of the word all too well. That is why it was wrapped in ceremony. It was spoken beneath palace vaults, among columns, against the backdrop of symbols and emblems. It was printed on parchment, proclaimed from balconies, carved into seals. It did not live in people's minds. It lived deeper, in a childlike certainty. If someone is power, then he must be closer to the heavens. When the first written laws appeared on the horizon, the word power already occupied a central place within them, undisputed, undefined, taken for granted. An invisible glue binding submission to order. And as time went on, the structure grew more refined, more subtle. New regimes came with words like freedom, equality, the people, but never with a rejection of the word power. Even revolutions that broke the necks of monarchs failed to produce a new word for the old role. The same mark remained: power. It merely moved from palaces into offices, from thrones into chairs, from crowns into suits and ties. And those who came understood. It is safe to change the facade, but not the code, because the code holds the structure together. And the word power became a universal anchor, the thing that creates an invisible ladder. Someone above, someone below. Even if everyone calls each other equal, even if charters of rights and freedoms are signed. As long as the word power lives in language, submission lives in thought. This is not mere inertia. It is an ancient contract. And everyone who enters the game first learns how to pronounce it. It is absorbed unconsciously in institutions, in documents, in speeches. It is repeated, representative of power, organs of power, vertical of power, branches of power, as if everything living and dynamic could be fixed by this single spell. But a spell works only as long as it is believed in. The word power demands constant feeding, and it is fed every day by news, headlines, textbooks, speeches. It is not questioned. it is not examined, because it has become an axiom, an unmoving stone in the current of thought. And yet there is a crack. A careful eye will notice it. In all the pretense of democracy, no one proposes abandoning the word itself. No one says, let's replace it. Yes, they say that power belongs to the people. But listen closely. The word remains, and with it, the ladder remains. Perhaps turned upside down, but the steps are still the same. As long as the word lives, the structure lives. And as long as the structure lives, there will be a master and there will be a subject, even if their positions are reversed. The strength of this word lies in its antiquity, in the fact that it was never interrupted, never replaced. That is the spell. That is the code passed from one generation of rulers to the next, sometimes with the banner of revolution in hand, sometimes with a constitution, sometimes with a ballot, but always with the same word, nesting in language, and through language, in consciousness. Only a full understanding of the mechanism can break the spell. Only a word can become a weapon against itself. But for that it must be seen, heard. Its tone must be caught. One must understand that it is not neutral, that it always says, I am above you, that it has never stood on the same plane as you, that it is not about delegation, it is about domination. And the moment this realization appears, a crack forms. Because everything that endured for centuries did not endure through strength, truth, or justice. It endured through the word. It was the word that created the invisible framework into which crowns, ranks, offices, and insignia were fitted. This word was not merely a concept. It became the very form of relationships between people. Unequal relationships, yet accepted as natural. And the longer it remained in the language, the more natural it seemed, like a cliff on the horizon that no one notices simply because it has always been there. No one asks why it is there, whether life is possible without it, whether it is even needed. The word power became a stone in the mind, a stone around which laws, customs, fears, and hopes were built. It became the gravitational center of the entire system. And as long as it lives, it continues to pull into itself everything new, everything living, everything human. Great ideas stood before it. Even freedom, even equality, even democracy. All of them, upon approaching its threshold, seemed to freeze, as if encountering an invisible barrier. Because within the language, in its very code, this word already lived. And it spoke quietly, but relentlessly. You are below, and someone is above. And if you understand this, then it does not matter whether you vote, it does not matter whether you call a ruler a president or a king. He still stands above you simply because you have consented to it by pronouncing the word. This is the deepest paradox. You can destroy a monarchy, but you cannot destroy the word. You can dismantle a throne, yet leave the ladder in the language, and everything will return. Not in form, but in essence. Because the code remains, passed silently, like breath, like ritual. Those who come to the levers of control, unconsciously, and sometimes quite consciously, accept this code. They do not need to learn harshness or oppression. It is enough to use the language as it was used before them, to repeat the term, to reinforce the structure, to agree with its formulations. They take this invisible key and open with it the door to old relationships. And the people, without understanding, walk in with them, because the word sounds familiar, because it does not alarm. It does not shout. It is simply privuchno. And behind this familiarity hides a great falsehood. The word power, in its original meaning, is possession, ownership. It is not about service, not about responsibility, not about coordination. It is an ancient formula of domination. If it lives in the language, then it lives in reality, even if outwardly everything seems different. That is why the only path to true liberation begins not with elections, not with slogans, not with changing parties, but with changing the word. Because language is the first and the last fortress of any system. It cannot be torn down by demonstrations. It requires awareness. It requires silence. A clear inner understanding. If I call them power, I place myself below. I agree. I continue the ritual. And the moment this understanding appears, a person steps out of the circle. For the first time, he says, "This is not power. This is governance. These are representatives. These are those who are hired." And if more and more people begin to speak this way, the system cracks. Because the word no longer works. It no longer holds. Its magic is broken. It becomes empty. It no longer possesses, because no one grants it that right. And then real transformation begins. Not sudden, not loud, but inevitable. Because with the collapse of the old word comes space for new meaning. And that meaning is no longer born from darkness or fear, but from maturity. From the understanding that governance must be transparent, accountable, replaceable, that those who manage shared resources do not stand above but stand within, on the same level, answerable to all. But to arrive there, one must take the first step. To say, power is a false word, a remnant, an ancient spell, and I will no longer repeat it blindly. It may seem small, but it is precisely from this that the end of a great illusion begins, the end of one world and the beginning of another. And when the old shell begins to crack, when the word loses its weight, when it no longer penetrates inward, a silence arrives. Not the silence of fear, but the silence before dawn. A world Ochishani from the ancient code may, for a moment, seem empty, as if its axis had been removed and it no longer knows how to turn. But this is an illusion, because along with the word, only the old shadow disappears, and in its place remains what truly matters. Freedom, not as noise, not as protest, but as silence, where no one rises above another through words, where there is no invisible ladder, where no one calls themselves power, because the word has become transparent, because it refuses to elevate some and bend others. And in that silence, a new speech begins to sound, slow, precise, true. It carries no words that tighten the chest, no titles wrapped in fear. It carries names, responsibility, work, service, meaning, and most importantly, it carries no lie. Because truth always begins with language, and falsehood begins with habit. That is why anyone who once spoke this word unknowingly is innocent. But anyone who continues to speak it after awakening becomes a keeper of the old darkness. That is why the struggle is not in the streets. It is in the mouth, in the phrasing. It is not a flame of revolution. It is a slow-burning awakening. And when it passes from one person to another, the world begins to change. Without war, without blood, but with a force far greater. Because a word, once removed from the throne, becomes just a sound, and a person who stops repeating Чужое заклятие speaks for the first time in their own voice. And in that moment, when ancient suggestions collapse and language becomes honest, for the first time there appears a chance for such a country, such a society, such a system where no one needs the word power because no one owns anyone. And this is the beginning of a true civilization, the one that has never yet existed, but is already breathing in the silence where a new speech is heard. The speech of the free, the speech of equals, the speech without a spell. The end of the chapter, but not the end of the path. It has only just begun. Dear friends, if this video truly left a thought within you, if, even for a moment during watching, you felt that conversations like these are still deeply necessary for people, help this project not disappear within the endless flow of empty and superficial content. Your subscription, like, and especially your comment are not just a formality for YouTube. They are a sign that people still need deep ideas, honest conversation, and a genuine attempt to understand the world a little more deeply than modern life usually allows. Write what you felt while watching, what you agreed with, what you would argue against, what thoughts appeared in your own mind. Because it is precisely from these living responses that a true space for reflection is gradually born, a space that is becoming rarer and rarer in the modern world. And if you feel that these ideas may matter not only to you, share this video with your family, your friends, or anyone who may also need this kind of conversation right now. Perhaps it is through such small steps that the return of genuine thought, real dialogue, and deeper human connection truly begins. This was Vladislav Abramov. Until next time.